What if I told you that the secret to ancient Egypt's incredible 3,000-year reign wasn't pharaohs, pyramids, or gods, but something far more fundamental? What if it was simply patience? Forget the epic battles and divine dramas you've seen in movies. The real story of how this civilization thrived is a lesson in waiting, a masterclass in emotional restraint taught by the mightiest force in their world, the Nile River. Every year, like clockwork, the Nile would swell, its waters rising to flood the surrounding lands. This wasn't a destructive catastrophe, it was a life-giving promise. The flood, called the Akhet, would deposit a layer of rich black silt, creating incredibly fertile soil. But here's the catch: you couldn't control it, you couldn't rush it, you couldn't fight it. All you could do was wait. And in that waiting, a unique kind of intelligence was born. For the early Egyptians, survival wasn't about being the strongest hunter or the fiercest warrior. It was about being the smartest planner. They had to calculate exactly how much grain to store to last through the flood season and the dry season that followed. They had to know when to plant, when to harvest, and when to simply stand back and let nature take its course. This required a level of foresight and discipline that was revolutionary. It was a cognitive leap. Instead of reacting impulsively to the world around them, they learned to anticipate it. Patience wasn't just a virtue, it was the ultimate survival tool. The person who could master their own impulses, who could delay gratification for a future reward, was the one who would lead their community to prosperity. This is where one of the most important concepts in Egyptian culture, mayat, comes into play. We often translate mat as truth, justice, and cosmic order, but it's much deeper than that. Mat was the natural rhythm of the universe, the predictable cycle of flood, growth, and harvest. It wasn't a lofty religious idea imposed from above. It grew directly from the soil, from the ecological reality of their lives. Living in accordance with mat meant understanding these cycles and aligning your actions with them. It meant harmony, balance, and stability. To go against mat was to invite chaos, not as divine punishment, but as a practical consequence. If you planted at the wrong time, your crops would fail. If you didn't store enough food, your family would starve. The universe wasn't judging you. It was simply following its own unchangeable rules. This deep-seated need for order and predictability shaped their entire society. Think about it. When your very existence depends on a shared resource like the Nile's floodwaters, individual ego takes a back seat to collective cooperation. It wasn't about one person's ambition or desire for glory. It was about everyone working together to ensure the system worked for all. You couldn't just build a dam for your own field. That would disrupt the flow for your neighbors downstream. You had to cooperate on massive irrigation projects, digging canals and building basins that would manage the water for the entire community. This fostered a mindset where the group's well-being was paramount. Stability wasn't just a preference. It was a survival strategy. And this is a radical departure from the strongman model of leadership we see in many other early cultures. So how did leadership even emerge in this cooperative environment? It wasn't through brute force or claims of divine right, at least not initially. The first leaders were likely the best project managers. They were the people who could organize the labor, manage the granaries, and oversee the distribution of food. They were logistical geniuses, not charismatic warlords. Their authority came from their competence, from their ability to maintain mat, and ensure the community's survival. The pharaoh, in his earliest conception, was the chief steward of the land, the one person ultimately responsible for making sure the national system of agriculture ran smoothly. His power was based on his ability to uphold this cosmic and earthly order. The crowns, the scepters, the grand titles, all of that came later. At its core, leadership was a practical job born from a shared logistical need. This psychological foundation is the key to understanding Egypt's incredible endurance. While other empires rose and fell in a matter of centuries, Egypt maintained its core identity for millennia. This wasn't just luck or military might. It was a deeply ingrained cultural mindset, a psychological discipline built on the belief in cycles and order. They saw time not as a straight line leading to some unknown end, but as a repeating pattern, just like the seasons of the Nile. The sun god Rhea died every evening and was reborn every morning. The god Osiris was murdered, dismembered, and then resurrected to rule the afterlife. This belief in eternal recurrence gave them a profound sense of stability. Even in times of chaos or foreign invasion, the so-called intermediate periods, they held a firm belief that order, or mat, would eventually be restored. It always had been and it always would be. This long-term perspective is baked into everything they created. Look at the pyramids. They weren't built in a frantic rush. They were multi-generational projects requiring incredible long-range planning, resource management, and a sustained collective effort. A pharaoh would begin construction on his tomb almost as soon as he took the throne, not out of a morbid obsession with death, but as a testament to this belief in an orderly, predictable transition to the afterlife. The pyramids are the ultimate expression of patience, monuments to a civilization that knew how to wait, how to plan for eternity. They are symbols of a people who mastered not just stone and engineering, but time and themselves. Even their writing system, hieroglyphics, reflects this mindset. It's a system of immense complexity and beauty, one that remained remarkably consistent for thousands of years. They didn't feel the need to constantly reinvent it or simplify it for efficiency's sake. It worked, it was part of their tradition, and it connected them to their ancestors. It was another pillar supporting the stability of their world. So when we look at the wonders of ancient Egypt, let's look beyond the gold and the grandeur. Let's see the quiet discipline, the psychological resilience, the profound wisdom born from waiting for a river to rise. The true legacy of the Egyptians isn't just the pyramids they left behind, but the powerful idea that civilization's greatest strength can come from cooperation, foresight, and the simple, profound act of waiting. They didn't just build a kingdom on the banks of the Nile. They built a mindset that allowed it to endure for 3,000 years. And in our own fast-paced, instant gratification world, that's a lesson that is more valuable than ever. Have you ever wondered why the Egyptian pharaohs weren't just kings, but were worshipped as gods? It's easy to think it was all about brute force, about armies and absolute decrees. But what if I told you the true power of the pharaoh wasn't in their swords, but in their ability to shape the very minds of an entire civilization? This is the story of how power became psychological, how an ancient kingdom engineered its own stability by mastering the human need for certainty. Imagine living in ancient Egypt. Your entire world depends on the Nile River. If it floods too much, your home is washed away. If it doesn't flood enough, your crops fail and famine looms. Life is a constant battle against chaos, a terrifying dance with unpredictability. In this world filled with fear, the Egyptians didn't just need a leader. They needed an anchor. They needed someone who could stand against the terrifying randomness of nature and promise order. This is where the pharaoh steps in. The pharaoh wasn't just a political figure. He became the living embodiment of cosmic order, or Mat. He was the emotional anchor for an entire population gripped by anxiety. His existence was a promise that the sun would rise, the Nile would flood just right, and the harvest would be plentiful. He was the human face of predictability in a world that felt anything but predictable. This wasn't a system built on oppression in the way we might think. It was a system built on reassurance. But here's the genius part. What happens when this god-king, this symbol of stability, dies? A mortal king's death creates a power vacuum, chaos, and fear. But if your king is a god, death is just a transition. The concept of royal divinity was a brilliant psychological tool. It ensured that the institution of the pharaoh was eternal, even if the man holding the title was not. The king is dead, long live the king. The death of a pharaoh wasn't an end. It was a seamless continuation of divine order. The son would inherit the father's divinity, and society could breathe a collective sigh of relief. The anchor was still in place. Continuity was guaranteed. So, the power of the pharaoh wasn't primarily about controlling people through force. It was about stabilizing society by managing its collective emotions. People followed the pharaoh not just because they were afraid of punishment, but because they believed he was their shield against a much greater fear, the collapse of their world. This psychological contract was the bedrock of Egyptian society for thousands of years. The pharaoh's role was to provide a sense of security that was more powerful than any army. And how do you make an idea like this tangible? How do you make divine stability visible to every single person? You build it. The incredible architecture of ancient Egypt wasn't just for show. It was psychological engineering on a monumental scale. Think about the pyramids. They are the most stable shape imaginable. A solid, immovable mountain of stone pointing to the heavens. They weren't just tombs. They were permanent, physical symbols of stability and eternity. Every time an Egyptian looked at a pyramid, they were seeing a visual promise. A promise that even in the face of death, there is permanence. A promise that their civilization, anchored by the divine pharaoh, would endure forever. The massive temples, the towering obelisks, the intricate hieroglyphs telling stories of gods and kings, all of it reinforced the same message: order has triumphed over chaos, and everything is under control. This was propaganda written in stone, and it was incredibly effective. Now, this system came at a cost. In this massive collective project of ensuring societal survival, the individual took a backseat. Egyptians effectively traded a degree of personal freedom and individual identity for the promise of collective longevity. Your purpose wasn't to forge your own path. It was to play your part in maintaining the cosmic order. You were a farmer, a scribe, a builder, a small but essential gear in a grand divine machine. This might sound strange to our modern ears, obsessed as we are with individuality and self-expression. But the Egyptian model reveals a profound and perhaps uncomfortable truth about human nature. It suggests that when faced with overwhelming uncertainty and fear, humans may not crave freedom above all else. What they might crave more is security, predictability, and a sense of belonging to something larger and more permanent than themselves. The pharaonic system was a masterclass in understanding this fundamental human drive. It recognized that the deepest source of power isn't controlling people's bodies, but shaping their beliefs and easing their fears. It was a social contract where the people offered devotion, and in return, the pharaoh offered them certainty in an uncertain world. Looking back, we can see the pharaoh not just as a king, but as the chief psychologist of ancient Egypt. He and the system around him understood that a society's greatest asset, and its greatest vulnerability, is its collective mindset. By transforming power from a physical force into a psychological one, they built a civilization that lasted for 3 millennia. They proved that sometimes the most enduring empires are not built on foundations of stone, but on the bedrock of the human mind. The legacy of the pharaohs is a powerful reminder that our need for order and meaning can be the most potent force in shaping human history. What is the one thing humans fear more than death itself? For many, it's the thought of being utterly forgotten. The idea that once we're gone, every memory, every trace of our existence, vanishes into the void. This primal fear, this deep-seated anxiety about oblivion, is a powerful motivator. And perhaps no civilization in history has channeled that fear more profoundly, more creatively, than the ancient Egyptians. They didn't just worry about being forgotten. They built an entire world to defy it. When you look at the pyramids, the temples of Karnak, or the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, what do you see? Massive piles of stone? Architectural marvels? Yes, but they are so much more. Think of them as a form of memory infrastructure. These weren't just buildings. They were machines designed to preserve identity, to project a name and a story thousands of years into the future. While other civilizations might have built walls for defense, the Egyptians built monuments for memory. The sheer scale and permanence of stone was their ultimate weapon against the erosion of time. They were carving their existence directly into the fabric of eternity, ensuring they could not be erased. And what good is a monument without a story? This is where their most ingenious invention comes into play: writing. Hieroglyphs weren't just a way to keep records or send messages. To the Egyptians, writing was a technology of resurrection. Each carved symbol was imbued with a kind of magic. To speak the name of the dead was to make them live again. To write their name in stone was to give them a permanent foothold in the world of the living. The Book of the Dead, funerary texts, and temple inscriptions weren't just decorative. They were active spells, tools to ensure the continuity of the soul and the perpetuation of memory. The word and the stone worked together, one providing the vessel, the other providing the spirit. Now it's easy to assume that ancient civilizations, once they had a surplus of food and resources, immediately turned their attention to conquest and warfare. And while the Egyptians were certainly no strangers to conflict, it's fascinating to see where their initial surplus went. Before building massive armies for expansion, they invested their collective energy into building a massive shared narrative. They funneled their resources into mythology, into creating a cosmic order that gave every person, from the pharaoh to the farmer, a place and a purpose. Their wealth was first and foremost used to construct a spiritual and ideological world, a story so compelling that people were willing to dedicate their lives to it. This shared mythology was the glue that held their society together, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Let's talk about the people who actually built these incredible structures. It's a common misconception to picture legions of slaves being brutally whipped into submission. While forced labor certainly existed in the ancient world, The reality for many of the pyramid and temple builders was more nuanced. Many were skilled laborers, farmers working during the Nile's inundation season. They received rations, housing, and medical care. But what truly motivated them to perform such backbreaking generational work? It wasn't the pursuit of wealth or luxury. For the vast majority of Egyptians, life was hard, filled with toil and uncertainty. What the grand state projects offered was something far more valuable than gold: meaning. By contributing to a pyramid or a temple, an ordinary person became part of something monumental, something eternal. They weren't just cutting stone. They were building a stairway to the heavens for their divine king, ensuring the stability of the entire cosmos. They were participants in the great national project of defying oblivion. Their individual suffering, their sweat, and their labor was justified by this shared purpose. They were building a legacy that would outlive them by millennia, and in doing so, they secured their own small piece of immortality. This is a crucial lesson about civilization itself. A society doesn't just thrive on prosperity or military might. It thrives when the inevitable suffering of human existence is given a higher meaning, when people believe their efforts contribute to a story larger than themselves. Think about it this way. The Egyptians were engaged in a multi-generational war against nothingness. The pharaoh wasn't just a king. He was the champion of order, or mat, against the ever-present threat of chaos and non-existence. The monuments were his fortresses in this cosmic battle. The rituals and writings were his strategic commands. And the people were his loyal soldiers, each one playing a vital role. This unified vision transformed an entire population. It turned a collection of individuals into a cohesive civilizational force, capable of achieving the seemingly impossible. They weren't just stacking blocks. They were building a bridge across time, a testament to the power of a shared belief to overcome our most fundamental fear. So the next time you see an image of the Sphinx or the towering columns of a temple, look beyond the impressive engineering. See them for what they truly are, a 4,000-year-old message. It's a message about the human condition, about our deep-seated need to be remembered. The ancient Egyptians looked into the abyss of non-existence, and instead of despairing, they picked up a chisel and got to work. They demonstrated that our greatest fear can be the source of our greatest creativity, and that through stone, story, and shared purpose, it is possible to leave an echo that will ring out for all time. Have you ever wondered why the ancient Egyptians were so obsessed with death? Pyramids, mummies, elaborate tombs filled with treasure, it all seems a bit much, right? But what if I told you their focus on the afterlife wasn't about death at all? It was about life. It was a brilliant psychological system designed to build one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. This wasn't just blind faith. It was a masterclass in social engineering. Let's travel back in time, way back to the early days of Egypt. Imagine trying to unite thousands of people along the Nile River. You have farmers, soldiers, craftsmen, and nobles. How do you get them all to work together, to pay taxes, to build massive monuments, and to follow the rules not just for a year, but for centuries? You can't have a police officer on every corner. Force and fear work in the short term, but they don't create a stable, thriving society. The early pharaohs and priests faced a huge social problem. How do you motivate people to cooperate for the long haul, to invest in a future they might not even live to see? Their solution was genius. They created a story, a grand narrative that gave everyone a stake in the system. And at the heart of that story was the afterlife. In the very beginning, during the Old Kingdom, the afterlife was an exclusive club. Only the pharaoh, a living god on earth, was guaranteed a place among the stars after death. His journey was what mattered. The massive pyramids weren't just tombs. They were cosmic launching pads designed to ensure the king's successful transition to the divine realm. Why did this matter to the average person? Because the pharaoh's eternal life was directly linked to the prosperity of Egypt itself. If he made it, the gods would be pleased, the Nile would flood predictably, the harvests would be plentiful, and the nation would be protected from chaos. So everyone had a vested interest in the king's successful afterlife. Building his pyramid wasn't just forced labor. It was a civic duty, an act of cosmic maintenance that secured your own well-being in this life. But then something incredible happened. As Egypt's society grew more complex, this exclusive model wasn't enough. A new middle class of officials, scribes, and artisans emerged. They had wealth and influence, and they started thinking, hey, what about us? Don't we deserve a shot at eternity too? This led to one of the most profound shifts in religious history. The the democratization of the afterlife. Starting in the Middle Kingdom, the idea spread that anyone, not just the pharaoh, could achieve eternal life. But there was a catch. It wasn't automatic. You had to earn it. Suddenly, the afterlife transformed from a royal privilege into a universal incentive. It became the ultimate long-term goal for every single Egyptian. This is where the real psychological brilliance comes in. How did you earn your spot in the beautiful field of reeds, the Egyptian version of heaven? Through a final judgment. After you died, your heart, believed to be the seat of your intelligence and conscience, was weighed on a giant scale against the feather of Mat. Mat was the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. She represented the ideal way things should be. If your heart was heavy with sin, deceit, and selfishness, it would outweigh the feather. A terrifying demon named Ammit, the devourer of the dead, would then eat your heart, and you would cease to exist forever. This was the ultimate annihilation. But if your heart was as light as the feather, it meant you had lived a good, balanced, and just life. You passed the test and were granted entry into paradise. Think about the psychological impact of this belief. Every action you took, every word you spoke, was being recorded for this final exam. It wasn't just about avoiding big crimes like murder or theft. The negative confessions, a list of sins an Egyptian would declare they had not committed, included things like, "I have not been greedy. I have not made anyone weep. I have not been arrogant, and I have not eavesdropped." This belief system was a powerful tool for regulating day-to-day social behavior. It encouraged honesty, compassion, and community cooperation. Why be a good neighbor? Because your eternal soul depended on it. This judgment balanced our natural, short-term emotional impulses with the long-term needs of a cooperative society. It made morality a matter of personal, cosmic survival. This faith in cosmic order in Mat had another profound effect. It encouraged people to think and plan beyond their own lifespans. The world wasn't a chaotic, random place. It operated according to a divine, predictable order. This belief gave Egyptians the confidence to undertake monumental, multi-generational projects. When you start building a temple or a pyramid, you know you won't live to see it finished. But that's okay, because you believe you are contributing to a divine plan, to maintaining Mat on Earth. This long-term mindset is what allowed them to achieve such incredible architectural and cultural feats. They were building for eternity, both literally and figuratively. Their work had a purpose that transcended their own mortal lives, connecting them to their ancestors and their descendants in a great cosmic chain. Furthermore, this intricate system of gods and rituals gave them a sense of control in a world filled with uncertainty. Ancient life was tough. You had floods, droughts, disease, and the constant threat of invasion. It's easy to feel helpless and afraid. But the Egyptian religion provided a framework for understanding and influencing the world. If the Nile wasn't flooding correctly, you could appeal to Hapi, the god of the flood. If you were sick, you could pray to Sekhmet for healing. The gods weren't distant, abstract beings. They were active participants in daily life. The elaborate rituals and offerings weren't just empty gestures. They were seen as practical ways to communicate with the divine and maintain the balance of the cosmos. This structure minimized the terrifying randomness of existence and replaced fear with a sense of purpose and agency. It gave people a way to navigate the challenges of life and death with confidence. So, when we look at the pyramids and the mummies, we shouldn't see a morbid obsession with death. We should see a powerful psychological toolkit. The Egyptian belief system was a sophisticated response to the fundamental challenges of human civilization. It provided social cohesion, incentivized moral behavior, encouraged long-term planning, and gave millions of people a sense of meaning and control over their lives. The gods, the afterlife, and the judgment of the soul weren't just fairy tales. They were the invisible architecture that supported one of the most resilient and influential societies the world has ever known. They understood that to build something that lasts for millennia, you have to build it first in the hearts and minds of the people. Imagine a civilization so powerful, so confident, that it believed it had conquered time itself. For 3,000 years, ancient Egypt stood as a monument to permanence. The Nile flooded like clockwork, the pharaohs were gods on earth, and the pyramids reached for an unchanging heaven. They built for eternity. But what happens when eternity collapses? This isn't just a story about ancient stones and forgotten kings, it's a story about us. It's a warning about what happens when a society becomes so rigid, so locked into its own success, that it can no longer see the world changing around it. For millennia, Egypt's greatest strength was its predictability. The annual inundation of the Nile was the rhythm of life, guaranteeing bountiful harvests and a stable society. Their entire worldview, their religion, their art, their government, it was all built on a foundation of cosmic order, or mat. Everything had its place, and the goal was to maintain that perfect balance forever. This predictability bred incredible strength, allowing them to create wonders that still awe us today. They perfected a system and saw no reason to change it. Why fix what isn't broken? But the universe doesn't care about our plans for eternity. While Egypt was perfecting its own world, the world outside was in constant motion. New powers were rising, new technologies were being forged, and even the planet itself was beginning to change. The first cracks in their eternal foundation appeared not from an invading army, but from the sky. Towards the end of the New Kingdom, a period of dramatic climate change began to grip the Mediterranean and Near East. The reliable Nile, the very lifeblood of Egypt, became erratic. Unexpected droughts led to crop failures and widespread famine. The divine promise of the pharaoh to ensure prosperity was broken. When the granaries were empty, the people's faith began to waver. How could the pharaoh be a god if he couldn't even make the river flow? At the same time, the global economy was shifting beneath their feet. The Bronze Age, an era defined by its reliance on copper and tin, was coming to a violent end. New people, the Sea Peoples, were on the move, disrupting the old trade routes that had made Egypt fabulously wealthy. And they brought with them a revolutionary new technology: iron. Iron was cheaper, stronger, and more accessible than bronze. It democratized warfare and industry. While Egyptian armies were still equipped with the gleaming bronze of their ancestors, upstart kingdoms were arming their soldiers with tough, effective iron weapons. Egypt, the old superpower, was suddenly facing a world where its technological edge had vanished. They were falling behind. So, why didn't they adapt? This is the core of the tragedy. Egypt's institutions, once a source of immense strength, had become a cage. The bureaucracy was vast and slow-moving, designed to preserve the status quo, not to innovate. The priesthood, immensely powerful and wealthy, had a vested interest in maintaining the traditional religious order. The entire educational and social system was geared towards replication, not revolution. Think of it like a massive, intricate clockwork machine. For centuries, every gear turned in perfect harmony. But when the outside environment changed, when new pressures were applied, the machine couldn't recalibrate. Instead of bending, it began to break. Any attempt at reform was seen as a threat to the cosmic order, an invitation to chaos. Their greatest strength, stability, had metastasized into fatal rigidity. They were trapped by their own success. The decline of Egypt wasn't just a series of military defeats. It was something deeper. It was the collapse of a shared dream, a loss of collective belief in the system. When people no longer believe their leaders are divine, when they no longer trust that the old ways will provide for them, the social contract dissolves. The empire didn't just fall to foreign invaders. It crumbled from within. Local governors asserted their independence, civil wars erupted, and the once unified kingdom of the two lands fractured into pieces. The spirit of Egypt was broken long before its borders were finally overrun by the Assyrians, the Persians, and eventually the Greeks and Romans. But here's the beautiful, paradoxical twist in this story. In a way, Egypt did achieve eternity. Just not in the way its pharaohs intended. The empire is gone, the pharaohs are dust, and the temples are ruins. But the idea of Egypt? That is immortal. Their culture, their stories, their art, and their incredible achievements have been so deeply woven into the fabric of human history that they will never be forgotten. Through our books, our museums, and our imaginations, their world lives on. They achieved eternity not through political power or military might, but through the enduring power of their cultural memory. They live on in us. So what is the ultimate lesson from the collapse of this eternal kingdom? It's a message that resonates powerfully in our own rapidly changing world. Perfect order is an illusion. The pursuit of a flawless, unchanging system is a recipe for disaster. True survival, true strength, lies in flexibility. It lies in the ability to adapt, to learn, to question old certainties, and to embrace change even when it's uncomfortable. The story of ancient Egypt teaches us that the most resilient systems are not the most rigid, but the most responsive. It's a reminder that we must always be willing to reinvent ourselves, because the only constant in this universe is change itself. Eternity isn't about standing still. It's about learning how to keep moving. If you find these journeys into the past as fascinating as I do, and you want to help uncover more of these timeless lessons, there's a simple way you can become part of our expedition. Think of the like button as a digital artifact and the subscribe button as your personal key to our archives. By clicking them, you're not just supporting a channel. You're helping to preserve these stories and share them with the world. Go on, press subscribe and like. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time.